We're live soon.
What?
Hi.
Hello.
I'm sorry for the delay. We had some we had some tech problems here.
Yeah.
We're first going to introduce ourselves. I'm Marina Mensch. I'm the assistant to the director here, and I also do some research for various projects we work on. And this is my colleague.
So my name is May. I'm a student at McGill University and currently a research fellow at MIGS. And I've been doing specific research on ISIS and their use of media so far.
So Max, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the subject of ISIS specifically and terrorism in general?
Well, that's a very good question. I guess I'm a post-9/11 baby. I was doing a master's degree at Oxford University, the M.Phil in International Relations, starting in 2000. And it's a 2-year program with a very long summer that continues through the month of September. And in the first year, I proposed doing my thesis on something relating to terrorism. And they told me that actually terrorism is not a suitable topic within the study of international relations, that international relations is really about great power conflicts between states. This was the era of realism. I mean, there was some focus on non-state actors, but it was mostly about globalization, international political economy. When people thought about security, they didn't think about non-state actors, and they told me that I would have a difficult time at Oxford finding a suitable advisor. And then I went home to the New York region, to Connecticut, over the summer, and the World Trade Center towers were taken down, and I was just absolutely mesmerized. I went back to Oxford just a few weeks later, and they told me there was no better place for the study of terrorism than Oxford University. So then I don't know, I could go on. I went into the think tank world in Washington, D.C. immediately after that. The Iraq War went south, and I became disenchanted with the predictions of basically the policy community. Then I decided to get my Ph.D. at UCLA because David Rappaport was there. He's the longtime editor of Terrorism and Political Violence and a leading historian on terrorism. And so I've been working on terrorism for a very long time. And obviously I'm very interested in Islamic State because that's the baddest terrorist group in town.
Yeah.
So the thing is, though, is unlike many people who talk about Islamic State, I have a background in all sorts of different kinds of terrorist groups. All of my studies on terrorism are large N, and what that means is there are a large number of observations, generally a large number of groups, attacks throughout the world over decades. And I think that this kind of background provides important and unique insight into making predictions about Islamic State, because if you focus only on this group, you're going to miss a lot of things. And I think that becomes evident just in listening to all these pundits talk about Islamic State without any context.
Right. Okay, well, we'll ask you a set of questions. Do you want to start?
Yeah. So I'll start just with a brief introduction about where ISIS has been so far with social media and whatnot. So we've seen that since last summer, there's been a lot of talk about how ISIS is conquering the web with its propaganda and recruitment strategy. So it's created apps for Android phones. Its supporters hold over 46,000 Twitter accounts. And so far, estimates say that there are about 3,000 Western fighters that have gone to Syria. So all in all, it appears like they have been successful in their attempt to both make progress on the ground and on what we can now call the why the Islamic State actually stinks at social media. You state that, in fact, ISIS had made their biggest gains before it launched its full-fledged media propaganda. So indeed, you mentioned that before they became so mediatized, they were able to make progress more or less unnoticed and their online campaign has so far been kind of mostly counterproductive. So therefore, my first question is, do you completely revoke the idea that ISIS has launched a solid cyber war?
No, I think that we need to handle this question of ISIS's reputed social media prowess with some nuance. There is a widespread perception that Islamic State is absolutely masterful at social media, and that Western governments in particular really are just sitting ducks because Islamic State can communicate with our citizens and recruit them in unprecedented numbers. And I mean, there is some basis for this. I don't know of another terrorist group as savvy with social media as Islamic State. And I don't believe that it's completely incidental that jihadis from so many different countries are making the trek to join up with Islamic State. And indeed, we know even on a more sort of micro level that many of these Westerners, probably most, who are being recruited to Islamic State are being lured in through their online game in some fashion or another. So I do not debate this fact that, in a sense, Islamic State has been successful with recruitment by using its online presence, particularly the social media, to reach out to a slice of the world, particularly the Muslim world, that's already radicalized and is looking to do something else with their lives. So there's no question about that. However, the argument that we're hearing is actually a lot stronger than that. It's that Islamic State's membership size is growing. And the growth of this membership size is inevitable because of their talents in social media. And so therefore, if governments stand any chance at all to combat Islamic State, we need to sort of replicate their social media strategies while simultaneously shutting down Twitter accounts, wherever they might be, from ISIS sympathizers. What I think that that argument overlooks is that ISIS's social media has cross-cutting effects. Yes, it's true that it is able to lure, a certain slice of the radicalized Muslim, international population, if you will, but it actually comes at a cost, and a huge cost, I would say, that may actually be heavier in the long term than the benefits for the group. Again, I just want to be clear, I'm talking about, let's say, the dependent variable, to be an academic, is the membership size of the group. And the independent variable, are all the different avenues for social media. I'm not persuaded that there's an overall, in the aggregate, uptick in the overall membership size of the group because of the social media strategy. Because what we need to do to get at this very important question is look not only at the small slice that's being attracted to Islamic State, but also take into account the huge numbers of people who, when they see beheadings by Jihadi John, are not attracted to the group, but repulsed by it. And I would encourage all of your viewers to do a sort of a thought experiment, or even to operationalize this thought experiment by presenting these videos, Jihadi John videos, which are supposedly so irresistible in terms of building up the membership size of the group. Show them to your friends and see whether the typical response is to be attracted to the group or repulsed by it. I have a lot of crazy friends, and I can tell you that with authority that none of them find this strategy to be attractive. And even more than that, just this sort of silly anecdotal point, is that it should be pointed out that, sure, Islamic State has a pretty big membership size in comparison to other terrorist groups. Let's even grant that it has a very large membership size in comparison to terrorist groups. Well, if violence and the social media that propagates it is so effective in terms of building up the membership size of the group, what we should observe is that Islamic State has a larger membership size than nonviolent groups that do not use social media. The question is that the case? It's completely not the case. For a nonviolent group, Islamic State's membership is tiny, right? Furthermore, the enemies against Islamic State, the anti-ISIS military coalition, if you will, is growing and growing. So you have not just the vast majority of people being repulsed throughout the world by this group, but actually backing it up by joining this military coalition, which is now quite large. And when you look, even in a more micro sense, at why this anti-ISIS military coalition is growing, it's not just a coincidence. It's actually being driven by Islamic State's violence and how it propagates it all over the world. The United States, for instance, did not participate, not lead the anti-ISIS military coalition until Islamic State basically started using social media against Americans by threatening to chop off the head of our journalist James Foley, right? And then when they did that, we began to respond. We took a leadership role in expanding the military campaign from Iraq into Syria. And frankly, every target country has responded in the exact same way. The Jordanians, for instance, they did not believe that the Islamic State threat, really threatened Jordan. There was some skepticism that it was a Western creation, if you will. But then, when they torched its citizen and broadcast it all over the world, all of a sudden, the Hashemite kingdom became very serious about taking on Islamic State, and the Jordanian public, for the first time, rallied behind it, and that was reflected in a pretty serious bombing campaign against the group in terms of Jordan's, air power capabilities. Egypt also really took a back seat against Islamic State. It was only when the group killed 21 Egyptian Coptics in Libya and then broadcast it all over the world that Egypt said, you know what, we want to create some kind of a pan-Arab military force to take on the group. Even the Japanese, the Japanese are a very Pacific country. After World War II in 1947, Article 9 of their constitution bans the country from war-making capabilities. Well, Islamic State, killed a couple of its citizens, broadcast it all over the internet, and all of a sudden there was this tide in Japan to overturn Article 9 and to have some war-making capabilities precisely to respond to threats like Islamic State. And so I think that, those who focus only on the very narrow slice attracted to Islamic State are really missing a very big part of the picture. I'll give you an analogy of what it's like. Imagine there's a small guy who walks up to a large bartender, right, and punches him in the face, and then brags about it to all of his friends. If the observer stops right there at that point, he might think, you know what, this little guy got a lot of utility out of the violence and out of bragging about it because he looks like the man. But guess what's going to happen? The bouncer is going to crush this guy. And I'm afraid that the social media alarmists, if you will, that's what I call them, have left after, right after the initial punch, but before the Islamic State crushes the guy. And I think that we need to wait around in order to really understand the cross-cutting effects of this social media campaign, which is not categorically good for the Islamic State, but carries very real risks especially in the area of support. So, I cannot hear you.
No?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
Your question?
So, yeah, I mean, we had a questions also. What do you think about ISIS's on-the-ground strategy? Do you
What do
think
you mean by that?
do you think it's stronger than their online strategy? Do you think there
I
are
see.
reasonable advances?
I mean, this is really the issue. I think that, you know, the social media game, both that Islamic State uses and the remedies that are being discussed by governments, I think that this is an overrated aspect of in terms of the future plight of Islamic State. What really matters is what happens on the ground. Let's say, for example, as many of your viewers know, the Iraqi security forces are getting really serious about taking on Islamic State in Anbar since what happened last week when ISIS took over the capital of Ramadi. Well, the Iraqis are now responding, and they're responding in heavy force with the support of the Shia militia. And, you know, just a couple months ago, a similar force was arrayed against Islamic State in Tikrit, and it was successful. I mean, it took about a month, took too long. There was some problems with coordination. There were some sporadic reports of Shia militia torching some homes, etc. But overall, Tikrit was a success. The local population had really already dispersed to a large extent. And at the end of the day, Islamic State was no longer really a viable presence in the town. If the same thing were to happen in Ramadi, and make no mistake, this will be a much tougher battle for that to happen. Things will not go as swimmingly. But if at the end of the day, the Shia militia are able to take out, a large number of IS members, and the Sunni tribesmen do not resent the Shia militia for encroaching on their territory, and the Shia militia do not misbehave by using violence indiscriminately and trying to, advance their sectarian interests. If basically there is a general sort of unity against Islamic State, and somehow that group is flushed out of Ramadi and Anbar more broadly, I think that that'll put a real dent into Islamic State's recruitment. And they can, maintain the exact same social media strategy. But what's going to be predictive of the number of recruits will be how the group fares on the battlefield. And that's really why it's so essential for us to use military force effectively against this group, because ultimately that will determine the membership size more than its, Twitter campaign.
So what do you think, for example, of the different kind of initiatives that the U.S. government, but also the French government have taken to kind of try and, counter these social media strategy? The U.S. government had its own strategy. The French government had a video online as well, trying to counter ISIS. So those are the government strategies. We've also seen more grassroots strategies from former extremists. Or here in Canada, we have Christiane Boudreau, whose son went to Syria and died over there trying to, and she's been kind of raising awareness about the dangers of recruitment and online recruitment. What do you think about those the strategies?
Sure. So, I mean, just as I think that Islamic State's social media strategy is actually pretty marginal in terms of the overall membership size of the group, I think that our response over social media is also pretty marginal in terms of the ultimate trajectory of this group. That said, I'm not opposed to it. I think that even things that can work at the margins should be employed. You know, counterterrorism is a multifaceted game. It's multi-layered. We need to try to resist this group with every means available to us. Yes, on the battlefield. Yes, over social media. Yes, in terms of more careful immigration policy. Yes, in terms of, you know, rehabilitation programs. Yes, in terms of sting operations against the group in order to try to find, you know, lone wolves. Yes, in terms of, you know, public diplomacy campaigns. I think we need to throw the kitchen sink at this group, but we shouldn't overestimate its utility. I have actually seen cases, though, where jihadis have been radicalized online. And I think that because people can be radicalized online, I suspect that people can also be de-radicalized online too. It may be easier to become radicalized online because there's a selection issue where those who are, you know, who are already radical, you know, are searching for this sort of content. It's not sort of randomly dispersed. But even those who have been radicalized online, sometimes they learn about things online which, you know, turn them away from the group, which, for instance, somebody might be radicalized online because they don't know much about Islam. And they're told that, you know, there's no higher duty than joining up with Islamic State, blah, blah, blah. And so they're basically, you know, hoodwinked into joining the group. And then they may start to have their own reservations about whether it really is Islamic to, you know, rape Yazidi women and to chop off other Muslims' heads. And they go online and they get sort of corroboration for their skepticism that actually the vast majority of the Muslim world does not find ISIS behavior very Islamic at all, that instead most Muslims view this sort of behavior as an outrage to Islam and as counterproductive for the religion and for Muslims throughout the world. And so I do think that we need to resist ISIS's online game with our own, but I don't believe that either online presence is determinative of the future of this group.
Okay, and then in a nutshell, what would be your counter-messaging solution then? Would it be both creating a counter-narrative built of Muslim voices, for example, as well as government effort, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of terrorism, and you look at, you know, the demise of terrorist groups, how do they go out of business? The number one way that terrorist groups go out of business is they have difficulty with recruiting because so many people are turned off by the group's atrocities. Yeah. So I actually think that these, you know, Jihadi John videos and whatnot that try to glorify the savage behavior of ISIS members is actually counterproductive in the long term. And I think that we should do our best, actually, not in terms of shutting down this content, but in terms of making people more aware of what Islamic State is really all about. Because I think that, you know, we need to basically bet on the decency of citizens throughout the world. And I think that there is an intuitive sense that is widely shared that this is a moral outrage. And I predict over time that ISIS will have more and more difficulty recruiting, that the anti-ISIS coalition will grow. You know, in the New York Times just today, I read that airstrikes alone have killed about 12,500 IS members. That's actually a lot of members. I mean, I understand that the group is continuing to expand in Ramadi, in Palmyra, etc. And we don't really have a good strategy against the group, either in Iraq or in Syria. But this group cannot continue to take on those kinds of fatalities, which frankly are going to rise dramatically as the Shia militia go into Anbar. And so I think that we're currently witnessing the heyday of Islamic State, both in Iraq and in Syria, that over time the fortunes of this group will change. And it's actually one of the reasons why Islamic State is changing its strategy. This is a group that is intentionally metastasizing and decentralizing all over the world and trying to set up affiliates, you know, in Yemen, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, you know, Nigeria, the Sinai, you know, any power vacuum it can get into where rebels or terrorists are declaring their allegiance to Islamic State. This group has an open door policy and says, yes, you can be one of us. And the reason is, I think, is because the leadership knows that its heyday is now in Iraq, that it can't continue to sustain these kinds of casualties. I mean, the one exception will be if the Shia militia essentially overreact and they use violence too indiscriminately. And that pushes Sunnis who are now neutral into the arms of Islamic State. That could really grow the membership size of the group. But short of that, I predict that the membership size will continue to deplete itself, certainly if we don't include all of these sort of self-declared affiliates that are springing up outside of Iraq and Syria.
Right. Perhaps one last question. Here in Quebec, especially, or Canada, but Quebec in particular, we've seen a lot of really kind of young Quebecers trying to go to Syria. 10 of them were arrested 2 weeks ago, for example. They all went to the same school. Do you think as groups like us here at think tanks or teachers should talk to their students about this problem? Do you think we should raise awareness about these issues in schools, considering we're seeing quite young people leaving to go to Syria and join ISIS, or to go to Iraq, and I've seen it in France as well, quite young kids really, or Australia even.
Yeah, I mean, again, I favor the kitchen sink approach in terms of counterterrorism strategy, not just, you know, one you know, solution, but anything that possibly could work. And the reason why I favor a multi-pronged counterterrorism effort is because there's no single reason why people join up with a group like Islamic State. Some people are attracted to the ideology. Some people are attracted to the fact that they have a friend who's intent on joining up with a group, and they're persuaded to accompany their friend for whatever reason, because they're bored, they're unemployed.
Backgrounds. We've seen people with very different backgrounds.
Yeah, but I think that it's important what you pointed out, that some schools are producing more jihadis than others, and I really think that has less to do with ideology than it has to do with the fact that terrorism is generally social behavior. Radicalization almost never happens in complete isolation, even if it happens over the internet. It's a group process. So we need to,
on the other side.
We need to pay very close attention to these networks of terrorists in Canada and throughout the West, because people tend to go together. So we need ideology. We need monitoring of social networks. We need to employ a multi-pronged effort, and that makes sense given the fact that people are joining this group for multiple reasons. So no one solution is going to resolve the problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Max. I'm sorry for the tech problems that always happens.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for joining in, and we'll continue to follow your Twitter account. You're very active on Twitter, and we also like the fact that sometimes you just make fun of them. I think that's always a kind of good solution, to just make fun of them in a way, even though they post horrible images. It's good to ridicule them once in a while.
It's good to ridicule everybody once in a while.
Yeah. Thank you very much,
All
Matt.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.